Okay, let's go. Hi, welcome to the Neurosec podcast, where we are on a mission to flip the script on neurodiversity and cybersecurity, technology, society, and culture. My name is Nathan Chung, and today my special guest is Sean Smith. Welcome, Sean.
Hey, Nathan. Thanks for having me.
Great. To kick things off, can you tell us more about yourself?
Sure. I'm a counselor and psychotherapist by trade, and I started Don't Diss My Ability about 6.5 years ago. And I work with uniquely gifted neurodivergent folks and their parents and their families. I do a lot of advocacy work, and I also consult in different industries.
That's incredible. So, being neurodivergent yourself, what are your typical day-to-day strategies for coping?
One of the big ones for me, man, is keeping a running to-do list of all the stuff that I need to do in the run of a day. And this is something I actually help people with a lot because, and you and I talked about this, like we get so into what we're doing that we'll forget to eat sometimes,
Yes.
Like just basic things. So I actually have a running to-do list on the notes section of my iPhone with a little bubble beside it so I can check things off as I go through. But I mean, I have everything from, make my bed, shower, get dressed, and more labor intensive stuff like work wise on there too. But I always start my day off with those things like eating breakfast, making sure I walk my dog, all these things, because as my mind starts to cycle, it can kind of get fixated on something, which means I will forget about the rest of the things that I need to get done. And then before you know it, an hour, 2 hours has passed and I've barely done anything that I needed to do on my list. So I really do try to stay regimented to the list, but I think one of the challenges is that any tool is only as good as the person who uses it, right? So it does take a tremendous amount of discipline to stay on the list. And, no one's perfect. Every now and again, I kind of veer away and I've got to reel myself in and bring myself back to task. But that's a big part for me, man, is that daily checklist for sure.
And you're absolutely right. Like similar to me, I'm late to the game, but the list is just so important because sometimes it's something as simple as eating food, or sometimes I forget.
Absolutely, man. It's knock on wood, I haven't forgotten anything like picking my kids up from school or daycare. But like
That's
we also
important.
when we don't eat, man, I think a lot of us get hangry, and then that
Yes.
that in of itself is a trigger. And then when we go into other situations, we're not really we're not present and we're not happy. And we're not always that great to be around when we are hangry. So I really do encourage people to, bring snacks and have lots of snacks around so that, and again, to put little reminders in, like it's really important for me. I'm a visual kinesthetic learner. So I really do rely on, setting up my calendar so that I get those notifications like, hey, Sean,
Yes.
You need to eat, or, hey, you got to get up and go for a bike ride, or all the little things that just seem to escape us because we're kind of macro big picture thinkers, right? And
Yes.
sometimes the micro stuff just kind of slips through the cracks, or sometimes if it's something we're really interested in, we can get into the micro, but we don't really understand the macro part of how it all comes together.
Absolutely. Okay. Next question. Looking back at my own life and career, it was not always moving forward. It was full of ups and downs, more downs than ups. I have failed before. I had jobs that sometimes lasted less than a year. I was part of nonprofits and companies that have failed, and I have often been bullied and treated like garbage at work. Overall, it is hard while living with neurodiverse conditions. Has it been the same for you? And do you have any stories to share?
Yeah, I mean, I could write a book. I am writing a book. It's just taken a while to get out, but a big part of my story, to go backwards, like this is what I do now. And I always tell people when I share my story, like, what I do isn't nearly as exciting as how I got here. I was first diagnosed with ADHD and attentive type when I was 30. And prior to my diagnosis, it took me 4 years to finish 3 years of high school, 32 attempts during the 18 credits required to graduate, and failing grade 10 math 4 times. I started playing football in my first year of high school. By my second year, I was an all-star. I got recruiting packages from every major Canadian university with a football team.
Wow.
And it was such a high. It was, yeah, man. But then it was such a low because I didn't have the grades to get into any of these schools. So it was like, you know, I get called to the principal's office, and not that I get called to the principal's office a lot, but this was the only time that was like, you know, for something good, you know. So I get back to class and I'm opening up all these envelopes, and one after one, I realized like I didn't meet the minimum educational requirement to get in. But a college from Quebec actually snuck me in. The head registrar was also the defensive coordinator for the football team, and they snuck me in. It took me 3 years to finish a 2-year program, but I did it. Moved back home to attend university, and I graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree with a double major in sociology and psychology. But I graduated with a 2.3 GPA. And then fast forward to being diagnosed at 30 and taking prescribed medication, which basically took my thought process from dial up to high speed. I went back to upgrade as a mature student, took 5 courses, earned a new GPA of 3.7. And then in 2010, I was accepted to the Masters of Education and Counseling Psychology program at the University of New Brunswick on academic probation, graduated a year later at the top of my class. So a very unique lens through which to help people. But also, you know, when you talk about like the employment side of things, I've had 22 different jobs. I've literally done everything from shovel shit as a landscaper to working at McDonald's. I worked security. I was a head doorman at a nightclub. I was a blackjack dealer in Lake Tahoe, where I actually learned how to do mental math. I was a sheriff's officer. I worked 2 murder trials. I was the therapeutic foster parent in the state of Maine with my wife. Worked in residential treatment facilities for at-risk youth in the Northwest Territories, and also worked in the nonprofit sector here in Fredericton, New Brunswick. And that really was kind of the driving force for me getting into and creating my own business. Was, you know, I was somebody who self-identified as having a disability, and yet, you know, the other people in the organization really were more focused, it seemed, on making money than helping, you know. And I also noticed this cyclical type of funding pattern where, you know, these nonprofits would identify a problem, create a proposal, get funding for the problem, and then create a resource or a program, but yet that problem still exists. So it just keeps going around and around and around. So I like to say, you know, they're busy talking about progress. I like to be busy making it.
Absolutely. And sadly, I've seen the same at many nonprofits. Looking at entrepreneurship, most entrepreneurship is a choice not often considered by many people with neurodiverse conditions. Whereas a lot of people, when they have this condition, they have the skills that would allow them to succeed, such as yourself. What led you to start your own business, and do you feel it is a suitable occupation compared to traditional jobs?
Hell yes. You know, for me, it was kind of a perfect storm situation where I was filling a mat leave position for a nonprofit. And so the person was coming back, which meant I was going to be on unemployment benefits. And so I took that opportunity to tap into a program that we have available in New Brunswick called the self-employment benefit program. So if you're on unemployment benefits, you can put a business plan together and submit it. And if it's approved, then you can have your benefits extended and you get some help with your business. So I went through that program, and without that, I wouldn't have been able to survive, because they extend your funding for a certain period of time. And regardless of how much money you make through your business, it doesn't impact the level of funding that you get. So that was definitely a huge help. But I mean, I think that one of the biggest problems that I experience is, you know, a lot of times the people who are closest to us, the people who should provide the most love and support, often provide the least, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship as a possibility, because they want something that's safe for us, right? They don't want risk involved. If we work for somebody else, then they think that we'll require less, and that, you know, entrepreneurship is just there's too much involved. And I'm not going to sit here and say that it's easy. You know, no one ever said being awesome would be easy. There is a toll that we pay for operating at a certain level. And although I do run a successful business, it doesn't mean that it hasn't been without challenges, you know. And I think that's one of the you know, entrepreneurship, I think, is often glamorized. You know, I really do try to explain to people it's a lot more than headshots and one-liners. There's a lot of you know, going through the trenches, and I really do try to share a lot of this stuff, Nathan, because I think entrepreneurs who are thinking about it need to know that, like, yes, you know, one day, you know, the water stopped running in my house. You know, I didn't have the money to hire somebody to fix it, so me and a buddy dug, you know, about 7-8 feet down, had to find the wellhead, figure out what was going on. And then I had to hire a company to come in and expose the wellhead. But like, when the water stops running in your house, like everything else stops too, right? Like life, work, everything, because it has to get fixed. And these types of things just kept happening. We had, a hole in our roof. We had water coming down through the walls, mold. Like these are all things that, people don't talk about, but need to, because this is what it means to be an entrepreneur. Like if you don't experience anxiety and depression as an entrepreneur, then I like to say, you're either spending somebody else's money or you're just not doing it right. There's going to be ups and downs. There's no two ways about it. Like, and I remember, in our initial conversation, I told you, like, there were times when I didn't know when the next check was going to come in. So I would go to Costco, I would buy the big giant cans of tomatoes, and I would make tomato sauce and jar it and freeze it, because I didn't know when money was going to roll in. And while I was at Costco, I would have bought like the big giant thing of pasta to go with the sauce, because that was our reality, right? So I really, I'm glad you asked that question, because I think that a lot of people get caught up in what they think is success, in those glamour headshots and those catchy one-liners, and they think, oh, everything looks so easy. Well, social media has a way of doing that, right?
Yes.
People will come and see me, and they'll see me in the street, and they think, oh wow, congratulations, you're doing so well. And I just think, then how about you share my shit for me? Like, how about you help promote me? Like, just help a guy out,
Absolutely.
So there's a lot more to it, definitely, than I think people think. But everybody's going to have challenges. Like for me, the financial side and some of the organizational stuff is the stuff that's hard for me. So I think it's important to kind of identify your strengths, but also your challenges, and then find people who can help you with those challenges, because no one can do this on their own. And anybody who thinks that they can they're fooling themselves. Like, you're going to need help from somebody at some point. So the sooner you can identify what you need help with and ask for it, the better off you'll be in the long run, for sure.
Absolutely. And I can identify with that as well, because having autism, for some reason, it seems really hard to ask for help. It's a mental barrier. I'm sure you saw the same.
Yeah, and so, like I mentioned, that I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 30. I was recently diagnosed as being autistic as well, and so asking for help has been difficult. But I think for me, it's that I operate at a certain level, and when I ask for help, my expectation is that the person I'm asking is going to be able to, their work will be at the same level as mine. And then when I get it back, I always seem to be disappointed because it's not. And so it makes it hard to ask for help, because again, we have these high expectations where we are high achievers. I think that's also, a misconception of people with disabilities, is that, we don't contribute, or we're not able to contribute. Well, man, we're doing next level shit. Like, we just, so
Yes.
There are bound to be things that we're not that great at. And so it can be hard to ask for help, especially if the people we need to ask are the ones that don't really support us to begin with.
Correct. I totally see that. But another question. So when you create your businesses, did you work with a group of friends, or did you do it on your own at first?
So I started on my own, and a friend of mine, Eugene Fowler, who owns, he's the founder of Lugaroo Animation and Games. He really encouraged me to get involved with my local startup community. And I was really hesitant, because I am my own product. And, I always thought that, companies that went into accelerators had a tangible product, or they had an app or some kind of tech that they were trying to get out there. And so he really encouraged me to do it. And so I applied to the B4C Social Entrepreneur Accelerator, and was accepted. So I was one of 8 businesses, and it was pretty neat, because although there were 8 businesses, there were 2 of us that were solo entrepreneurs. And so we kind of worked together, and it was interesting, because it seemed like everybody else who had a team, they spent a lot of time kind of bickering and arguing about what they should be doing. Whereas with us, we were because it was just us, we could really help each other out and move things along. So I definitely had help in that way. And it was an 8-week program. And then I was able to apply for up to $5,000 worth of funding for marketing. And so I was able to get that, and used it to create a short, an animated short that kind of describes me and who I am. I used some of it for a website, and then I used the last portion to go speak at a conference in Florida as an expert on disability-related startup companies. So I definitely had some help, man. And I think, like, when I got into that space, it was really kind of bizarre for me, because entrepreneurs started flocking to me left, right, and center. And so it kind of came to me that, I think most entrepreneurs are neurodivergent. They may be diagnosed or diagnosed. I think a lot of them are undiagnosed. But I really found it fascinating how I started getting emails and calls and people wanting to talk to me at different events and stuff. It was really kind of reaffirming that, we're all going through this, just not everybody's talking about it. And I think that's a real shame.
Absolutely. Next question. Being neurodivergent, do you feel that your traits give you an advantage to make entrepreneurship much more fulfilling and advantageous?
Absolutely. And I think a big part of this is my story and sharing my story, right? I think that this is part of the struggle with other neurodivergent individuals who are thinking about entrepreneurship. Some people don't like to share their story. They're not in a space where they're comfortable doing that yet. And that's not for me to judge. If they're not there, they're not there. And I'm not going to try to convince them otherwise. All I can do is inform them of, when you share your story and it becomes part of your business, people will then relate to you, right? Back to Simon Sinek, people buy the why, not the what, right? So when you share that why about what you do and why you started it, people will resonate with that. And as people resonate with it, they're naturally drawn to you, and then you have something going, and you just kind of build momentum on that.
Absolutely. But I think more at diving into the weeds, like, are there any specific neurodivergent traits that you have that makes being an entrepreneur, like, that makes you more comfortable to be an entrepreneur? Any specific traits? If you're
I don't know about I think resilience for sure. I think that's a key trait. I mean, if you don't, I don't want to say develop a thick skin, but if you're somebody who is sensitive to people saying no, then it's going to be extremely challenging, because you're going to experience a lot of no's before you get to that yes. I think a lot of people have an idea of what they're going to do. And like, I mentor a lot of entrepreneurs, and when they come to me with a business idea, I say, that's great, but that's not what you're going to end up doing. Like, it's going to change. It has to evolve in some way, shape, or form, right? So it's great to have that initial idea, but if you're not open to it evolving, then you may be stuck and fixated on something that may not work. So I think, you need to be open to hearing what other people have to say, which can be a challenge for a lot of us, right? We kind of get fixated on something. And but I think, I don't know how to describe this as a trait, but like, the way that my mind operates and cycles allows me to see things that other people don't really pick up on. And this is part of I think the innovative side of my way of thinking is that, when I see something or somebody has something to show me, I'll say that's great, but it doesn't work, and I can show you how to make it better. An example of that would be, like, I think I mentioned this to you before, my daughter plays ringette, which is, that's in a hockey arena. And so when, and they always ask parents to volunteer. So I have to run the shot clock or the scoreboard, and in each arena, they're all different systems. And like, the city owns all of them. So it just baffles me why they didn't have one system for every arena, so that you wouldn't have to reteach yourself every time you go to a new rink. Well, I just, so again, the way that my mind works is like, why are they spending like $10,000 to $30,000 on this jumbo, scoreboard that has all these bulbs that have to get changed and all this stuff? Like, they could have one big giant LCD screen, and they could have an iPad or a tablet with an app that could keep score, where they could just change things and it wouldn't be so complicated, and they could have them in every arena, right? So this just, it's how my mind naturally works. I used to try to like shut it off or suppress my ideas, but now I've just kind of come to embrace them. And I actually have a different note section where I've got like ideas for apps and inventions and all this stuff. They may never see the light of day, but I always tell people, this is my first business. It's not my last. The goal is that when I have generated enough income with this business, that then I'll be able to kind of look at low risk, high reward for the next idea that's in the queue, see how far I can take it, and go from there. Great.
And I think you brought up a really good point. It's being neurodivergent. Sometimes it feels like you have this light bulb in your head, but sadly, for many of us, when we mask, we often turn that light off, because there's just so much pressure to turn that off and to be just like everyone else. And I think that's a tragedy, because it's like turning off our creative self that makes us different from other people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the term massing has just been something, I think in the last 2, 3, 4 years, maybe that's really become prominent as a term that people identify with. And so really it means that you're not being your authentic self, right? You're being essentially a shell of who you are to appease the people who you're surrounded by. And I really, in the work that I do, I really try to encourage people to think about what a friend is, because Facebook has done a wonderful job at redefining what a friend is. So I really invite people to, kind of close their eyes, think about a person, and if the value that they add to the relationship just pops into your head, then they're a friend. If it doesn't immediately come to you, then they're probably a friendly acquaintance. And when you kind of think of it that way, your circle of friends shrinks considerably, but those are the people that you can lean on in times of need, for sure.
Absolutely. Oh, another thing came to mind about entrepreneurship. I can imagine some people are, hesitant or afraid to start their own business because things like they're a parent and they have kids, so they think, they will not have time to do their own business. What would you say to that for the parents?
It really depends on the situation. I mean, I do work with a lot of parents who are not able to work because their child requires a certain level of care that prevents them from working. So what I typically try to do with parents, if it's something that they're interested in, is I try to explore what their passions are and then figure out if there's a way to turn that into a small business or a micro business. Oh. But for me, and again, being a psychotherapist, it's all about person-centered, right? It's meeting people where they're at and figuring out with them, driven by them, which way they want to go. So I have one client who is not able to work because of the level of care her son requires, and she's really into crafts. And so we've kind of looked at, creating one product in one season, so that when the next season comes, that's when it's time to sell. So always kind of being ahead by a season and creating a list of products that are always in queue. Unfortunately, the level of care her son requires has kind of prevented her from being able to do all of these things. So we're trying to kind of, scale back a little bit and figure out what is doable. But I think part of it is the belief of someone who, I'm a national award-winning entrepreneur. So when I work with people and I say, I think that you've got something here, they start to listen to me instead of the negative voices that they're surrounded with that tell them it can't be done, or this isn't a great idea, or you'll never make any money off of that, right? Sometimes it just takes somebody else who's not in that circle to believe in them, to give them a little confidence that, there is something here. I don't know that it's going to be $1 million product, but it will definitely put a little more cash in your pocket and give you a little freedom to do some of the things that maybe you're not able to do because they're on a fixed income.
Absolutely. And you just talked about something that's very interesting, that something just came to mind. I think for many of us who are neurodivergent, we often have the negative voices saying not to do something, but also in life, like many of us, we've gone through bullying, we've gone through many, negative situations, which it just crushes our confidence. So in your experience doing this work, how do you fight back against that? How do you gain that confidence to get out of bed, so to speak, and to change the world?
Sure. So I think where my confidence came from was when I went back to upgrade as a mature student. So I mentioned that I got my master's of education in counseling psychology. I actually wanted to get into social work. And so I had applied to get my bachelor of social work and my master's of education. And I didn't get into the bachelor of social work program. In the school's language and their affirmative action policy at that time, they only recognized Blacks, Aboriginals, and persons with physical disabilities. And so I ended up filing 2 separate human rights complaints against the university because they didn't acknowledge mental disorders or neurological disorders. And so again, I want to set the context here. My wife is in the social work program that I'm trying to get into. We have a 2-year-old son and my wife is pregnant. And we're both on funding through our government to attend post-secondary. So money's tight, stress is high. And here I am trying to get into school and I'm having to file human rights complaints. That it was a valuable lesson. I mean, I ended up sitting, I went to the Human Rights Commission. I sat across from the president of the university at that time, and I told him I took my grad ring off out of disgust. I wouldn't put it back on until things were made right. And he said, Sean, I'm going to go back up the hill and make you proud of your alma mater again. And the next correspondence I got was from a law firm. They spent tens of thousands of dollars to take me on over a 2.5-year period. And so I lost the war, but I lost the battle, but I won the war. They'll never admit this, but they changed their policy because of me. I forced them to do that.
Wow.
And so they changed their policy to make it a more inclusive policy. And so while I'm upgrading, I had 2 classes with one prof, Dr. Roland Christian, and they were Native Studies classes. And so I was also trying to enroll in our province's version of affirmative action called the Equal Employment Opportunity Program. And so I can't tell you how many jobs I applied for through the program, but I can tell you how many interviews I had. None. And so I'm bilingual. I speak fluent in English and French. I had a university degree, was newly diagnosed, and just saw all the potential, right? Things just started happening differently in my head. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together. And so I realized something. It wasn't me. I'm awesome. It had to be them. And so I wrote one paper worth 100% of my grade for both classes. And my paper was called Systemic Discrimination is Commonly Practiced by the Province of New Brunswick, a comprehensive analysis of the Equal Employment Opportunity Program. And I got 2 A's. And what I uncovered was this huge scam that our province was running, where, the goal of the program was to recruit and retain people from the 3 target minority populations. So visible minorities, First Nations, and persons with disabilities for a period of 2 years, and then make every effort to retain them. Well, essentially what I uncovered was that they were letting a lot of these people go before they had enough insurable hours to collect their unemployment benefits. So essentially what they were doing was exploiting people from the 3 target minority populations.
Oh my.
And so this is where I came up with the idea of the inclusion illusion, right? So a lot of the stuff that gets done is actually a smokescreen to give the idea that something's being done when really there's nothing happening in the background. And so this is where, people around me were telling me, like, the government wouldn't do that. Like, you're a conspiracy theorist, all this stuff. And so my confidence started to grow as I was, discovering all this stuff, and just, it wasn't me. It was this, like. And so when people tell me that the system is broken, I really challenge them, because that implies it was intended to work when it is not. Like, I had confidential stamped documents from ministers saying the program was broken, could be fixed for next to nothing, and the recommendations never saw the light of day, right? So as I kept getting information like that and coming out on top, that's really what helped me grow the confidence to be like, you know what, I've been listening to the wrong people, because all the people I was listening to told me that no, the government would never do this. And then, I did the legwork and found out that I was right. Right. Wow. So all of those things, it was extremely validating. And so, again, shortly after they revamped the program. They'll never say that it was because of me, but I know that because I'd asked them, like, in the 25-year history of the program up until that point, nobody had ever asked the questions that I'd asked. Right.
That's
so
incredible.
that meant it had never been audited. Right. And when I asked them what their measure of success was, it was whether or not the money got spent. And I said that no. That's fiscal responsibility. Yeah. That's the only type of responsibility you're trying to measure here. And so it's just stuff like that, right? So my confidence just kind of grew and grew and grew. And I always, I treat each conversation as an opportunity for impact. So every time I have an impactful conversation, it kind of gets me high a little bit, like, so all these kind of things that I do in helping people, selfishly are for me, but selflessly, it also helps them in the process.
Absolutely. And I really love that story, because being neurodivergent myself, sometimes the feeling is I cannot change things, but based on your story, it is very empowering. Very empowering. Thank you. Oh, and we got one question from the chat. I'd love to know your thoughts on neurodivergent people who are looking at starting a career as a creator in social media, live streaming, podcasting, etc. Sure.
Well, as someone who's had a failed radio show and 2 failed podcasts, I think I have a lot to add to this. Excuse me. I think the biggest thing is just to get started and to do it. I think a lot of us, we get caught up in the minutia of all the things that we need to do to make it look perfect. I'll say this, so, sometimes I swear a little bit. Like, when I was first getting started, I had a shitty little YouTube channel, and I was making these horrible videos in my basement, and an organization called Different Brains found me, and sent me a syndication agreement, right? So it's not about, the lighting. It's not about, sound quality. Yeah, maybe a little bit, because you need to sound audible. But it's really the content, right? And I'll go back to my buddy, Gene Fowler, who told me, he said, when you are undeniably the best at what you do, you won't have to look for people. People will look for you. So that's really just kind of always stuck in my head. So I wouldn't be so concerned about trying to figure out what everybody else is doing. Just do your own thing, right? Because as long as you make it about somebody else, it can never truly be about you. So figure stuff out on your own. If you need help, when you get to that point, ask somebody in your network, and I did that as well. When I got to a point where, I wanted to get things figured out a little bit. I asked for help in my network, and somebody helped me set up the lights. Somebody helped me pick out a webcam and a microphone. So I think that's a big challenge amongst us, is that we have this network of people who want to help us. They genuinely want to help, but if we don't ask, they don't know that we need it, right? So I think that, you can definitely tap into your network and use them as a resource, and a lot of people would love to help you out. You just need to let them know that you need it.
Absolutely. And I can totally relate to what you just said. When I started my podcast last year, I just kept thinking I'm just going to fail, because I wasn't using anything, no fancy graphics, and with my autism and speech impediments, like I thought no way in heck is anyone going to listen to a autistic person with speech difficulties. But I consider myself successful, and the people who listened to my podcast, they were very much impacted by the stories they heard, and that is very empowering. Even looking back, it was hard to get over that first hump of just getting started.
Yeah, I think that's usually the biggest hurdle, right? Is the getting started part. Like, you can improve on something that exists, but you can't improve on something that doesn't. So it's not about getting it right. It's actually about screwing it up a whole bunch of times. Because I know, and I'm pretty sure you're the same, Nathan. Like, I rarely make the same mistake twice. So the more mistakes I make, the quicker I'm going to learn. So I actually try to screw up all the time. And I know that sounds weird, but that's a big part of how I learn. So it's something that I've just kind of learned to embrace, which I think, as men with, toxic masculinity being an issue is can be a really hard thing to admit, that we failed or we didn't do something right. I think, again, to go back to that entrepreneurship piece, right? People making it seem as though they've got it all together. The people who seem like they have it all together and that's all they put out there, those are the ones that I worry about the most, because everybody has their shit. Just not everybody's wearing it on their sleeve, right?
You have a great point. I think social media exaggerates this too much. We always see the positive. We don't see the person, their failures or suffering. I think you're one of the very few I know who openly admit to having an authentic life of ups and downs, success and failure. And I think that's awesome. Being authentic carries so much more weight than like the people who make millions and millions of dollars and get their names in the paper. I really enjoy the authentic stories.
I do too. And I mean, I hope to be one of those people someday that has my name in the paper because I've earned $1 million. But I think part of that is in the sharing, right? Like, and this is how I connect with people as a psychotherapist as well, right? Like, I think that to have somebody sit across from you and with the expectation that they're just going to share everything without you sharing a piece of yourself is not realistic, right? It creates an us versus them type of situation, or a hierarchy. And I mean, I'm wearing a t-shirt, shorts and sneakers, and this is my day to day. Like I'm a true believer in not putting myself above or below anyone. And when you think about neurodivergent people and when they've asked for help, from professionals, the people who are standing across from them, usually have what I call a suit of armor, which is the button-up shirt and tie and the khakis, and I think that inadvertently it creates a hierarchy, which I really don't subscribe to at all.
Correct.
We're people.
Me
right?
too.
I put my shoes on the same way you put yours on, and
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, a really great question in the chat. What if you don't feel like you're awesome or the best at what you do? Do you have any recommendations for that? That's a really great question.
Sure. Well, if you don't feel like you're awesome or the best at what you do, no one starts out being awesome, right? Like nobody just tries something the first time and gets it instantly, right? I mean, some people do, but that's a very, very small portion of the population. It takes practice, right? Like me doing this interview now is coming off so well because I've done 50 interviews. I didn't sound like this in my first interview, right? I didn't sound like this in my second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, or seventh. And something that I've also done is I've gone back and I've listened and I've watched the interviews that I've done, right? So you have to be willing to put in the work. Like, things don't just happen. You have to work hard to make them happen. And it takes practice. You need structure, routine, and consistency. And you got to figure out, how badly do you want something? And excuse me, it sometimes, especially, having the ADHD component is tricky because, there's something shiny. Woo, you go in that direction. There's something else shiny. Woo, you go in that direction. So sometimes we have to reel ourselves in. And part of my business is that, like, I'll do, 4 or 5 different things, cycle through one, get to a point where maybe I can't do it anymore, and then I've got to go on to something else. So it's not always about doing one thing. It's figuring out, what do you like to do? What are you good at that kind of falls under the same umbrella? I also have a lot of, I push myself in different ways. So, I'm also an amateur chef and chocolatier.
Wow.
And so these are all things that, like, I taught myself how to do. Like, I would watch videos. I would buy high-end dark chocolate. I would shave it down with a really big knife. I learned how to temper chocolate. I made my own cherry cordials, like cherry chocolates. Like, I made my own fondant, and all this stuff takes practice. Like, the first time I made them, they tasted okay. I mean, it's chocolate and cherries and, sugar. So, I mean, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't as good as the second and third time that I made them. The last thing I made was artisanal hard candy. I got into watching all these companies make, like, hard candy by hand and putting designs in the candy and all this stuff. And so I started doing that and made lemonade candy. And I learned a lot about it. Like, when you're working with sugar and you color it, if you just leave it, it'll be transparent. But when you start stretching the sugar, it creates kind of like a silky, glossy finish. And so I just started doing that. But then it's summertime, so it's a little bit too sticky. It's not a really good time to be making candy. So I switched to a different thing where now I used to be a blackjack dealer. And so now I bought a kind of a felt mat, and I've got some cards, and I'm teaching myself how to do different card tricks. So it's not about, figuring one thing out, right? It's about trying to figure out a whole bunch of things. Take something as far as you think you can take it, and then switch gears and do something else. It really isn't about doing one thing. It's about trying to do a lot of different things and trying to do it under the same umbrella.
I love that. I never thought about that before, but I love it. It's really good advice. Next question is I heard you gave an amazing talk at the University of Miami titled "Nobody Ever Said Being Awesome Would Be Easy." Some of the highlights that caught my attention was about failing to recognize when individuals face struggles, and also while being misdiagnosed. Can you tell us more about these two areas and your views? Sorry, have your views and thoughts changed since you gave that talk?
No, they haven't really changed, but I mean, the message behind it is really, looking at our education system and how we're setting kids up to fail. Like, if the goal of inclusion is to get kids with disabilities to be more like kids without disabilities, that's actually assimilation, right? Mm-hmm. So really looking at what inclusion is, which to me right now is a buzzword for funding. Inclusion isn't a thing that you do. It really is a way of being. And if we have to teach our kids about inclusion, and I really want people to think about this, if we have to teach our kids about inclusion, it means somebody's already taught them how to exclude, right? That's the issue. It's not the kids. It's the people in their world who are teaching them how to exclude before they even get to school, and to create this hierarchy of differences and how people who are viewed as different are then seen as less than, right? Mm-hmm. So when I talk about, being awesome, nobody said being awesome would be easy. It's kind of like, the struggles that we go through to get to a point where, we can start to realize that, a lot of the things people told us growing up were not actually truths, again, it makes it hard because these are the people who are closest to us, like my parents told me that if I had a university degree, I'd be set. That was a lie. They told me if I was bilingual, I would be set. That was also a lie. They told me that I'd have one job and that would be my career. That was another lie, right? I've had 22 different jobs. So when we have this feeling of not being able to meet people's expectations, right? Of not having that one job and moving around and having a lot of different jobs. We feel people's, it could be disappointment, it could be shame. Sometimes it's guilt, and they're feeling like they didn't do enough for us and we didn't turn out the way that they wanted if they'd only done this, that, or the other thing, when none of it really mattered to begin with, right? So it's really kind of shedding all of that and coming out on your own and realizing that you are awesome. But, it isn't easy. And anybody who says that it is easy, they're lying, because it's not true. It's hard. It takes hard work. Like, again, things don't just happen. We make them happen. So if you're thinking that an opportunity is just going to fall into your lap, it's not. The minute you stop hustling to get things going, everything else stops too. So this is, I try to get people to understand that this isn't a short sprint. It's a marathon. It really is. And you've got to also recognize when you need to hand off that baton for a little bit and take a rest and take a break for yourself, for your own mental health, and allow someone else to come in and maybe help you, or schedule time off. Take time off, do something you love. I talked about me being an amateur chef and some of the other things that I do. When I find that I'm having difficulty processing something, and it could be work, could be personal, whatever it is, I go into my kitchen and I'll, I go deep into whatever process it is. And by the time I'm done, I'm able to kind of reflect and look at what the challenge was with a completely different lens. And I'm able to process things much more efficiently. So that's definitely one of the coping strategies that I use. But yeah, that was kind of the premise of the talk.
That is incredible. And you brought up an interesting point. I think for many of us who are neurodivergent, I think the first issue, like, it comes down to family. We grew up with family and parents, and that's our first source of, growing up, and almost like validation. We need that validation from parents, but kind of like how you said, sometimes they don't always give you the best advice. So hard question for you is, if people feel that their own family isn't really helping them raise you up or push you forward, where can you find that validation support if it's not coming from your parents or family?
Sure. Well, I think it's a tricky thing, like I love my parents, but I don't always like them, and I don't always like what they say or some of the things that they've done. So I think it's tricky. I usually kind of share an anecdote of, I'm at a place in my life now where the glass is half full. It wasn't always that way, but it is now. We all have people in our lives for whom their glass is half empty. And no matter how hard or how much they try to take from our cup to fill their own, their cup will never be full. But the real question is, what do we get out of letting them try? Right. So why do, and I experience this in my own family, right? If, I have good news, I go share it with my family, and they'll try to take me down a peg, right? Like, it's just, so I've learned I'm not going to share good news with them, right? When you share good news with somebody, here's a little tip. They should celebrate with you. And if they do anything but celebrate with you, then maybe they're not the right people to tell. And sometimes that it's kind of a strange feeling, because you feel like, you should want to tell your family. Well, when you tell them, if all they have is something negative to say, then why would you bother? Right. So I would focus more on the people who are excited and want to celebrate with you and want to kind of prop you up and help you out, because for some reason, the way that our brain works, it especially, neurodivergent thinkers, our thoughts tend to fixate on a lot of the negative stuff. And so, yes, a negative comment from someone that you hold up here weighs way more than somebody who might be, say, down here. And it impacts you and it sets you back, and they kind of get in your head, and then you just spiral in a lot of different ways when, you could have cut that off right from the onset. It didn't need to happen. Right. So kind of taking stock of who those people are in your life who are really going to be there to prop you up, and also, recognizing who's not. When I won my Startup Canada Award, I made a point of thanking everybody who helped me, but more importantly, thanking the people who didn't. Because those are the people who really are the inspiration that really drive you, right? Like, again, no one ever said being awesome would be easy. There's a lot of things you have to figure out on your own. And it's hard. You're going to fail a lot, but you got to keep at it. And I think for those who are on the fence about entrepreneurship, this is, for people who are, I would say, true entrepreneurs, there is no other way. You're going to, what I started doing in my business is not what I'm doing now, right? I think people have to, it's kind of an innate quality. And if you're on the fence about whether or not you have it, there's only one way to find out, and that's to dive right into the deep end.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I totally agree. There's like, I like what you said earlier about failing and just like bouncing back from failure. Because I think for like when I look back in my life, I'm similar. I had so many jobs, but I didn't really have validation from parents. Like for example, I work in cybersecurity, which is a hot, amazing field, but my mom, she thinks of it as she thinks I'm a janitor. Like, all right.
I totally get that, man. Like my family owns a landscaping and snow removal company, and like it's $1 million company, man. And you know, my dad's been a laborer for a lot of his life, and the fact that I make as much money as I do listening and speaking to people just does not register with him. Like he has a really hard time grasping that, and I've just tried. I just don't bother explaining it to him anymore, right? Like he'll ask me how I'm doing financially. I just say I'm doing okay, and I think that's more of his big concern right now, right? It's just if you're a parent, you want to make sure that your kids are okay, and so that's kind of as far as I'll let him in, because I know if I say any more than that, then the kind of digs or the cheap shots come in. So our conversations are, but I think that brings up another good point of setting boundaries with people, right? It's okay to definitely set boundaries with people, and just because you're talking to someone doesn't mean that you're automatically their emotional punching bag, right? It's okay to say, you know what, I really don't appreciate that you say that. And I've had these conversations with my family, and I can also say that sometimes it really does fall on they can't hear it, right? They've always seen us in a certain light, and that hasn't been through a successful lens. So when we do start to experience success, they have a hard time envisioning what that looks like, because it wasn't their experience with us. But it doesn't mean that it can't happen. It just means that it hasn't happened yet.
Absolutely. Oh, we've got a great question in the chat. You could talk about charging money to people. I feel like I have a lot to offer, but feel bad charging people. How do you feel?
Sure. So it really depends on, for me, this is kind of a personal question, which I don't mind answering. It really depends on what your qualifications are. Like I'm a Canadian certified counselor, and I'm a licensed therapist. So, I have the education, the experience, and the qualifications to be able to charge money. So I think a big part of it is looking at, what do you have as far as qualifications? What do you have as experience? And I also want to say that, the education piece, although it is important, for me, it was a piece of paper. Like I'm usually the exception to the rule. So I got into a master's of education program without having a bachelor of education. So they made an exception in my case because of all the experience that I had working with neurodivergent youth in a lot of different ways on the front line, right? So I was able to bring that experience, and they saw the value in that. So it really does depend. I mean, if you're not in what's the word I'm looking for? If you don't have like a governing body, right, then I think it's a little hazy, because with counselors, we have a code of ethics that we have to follow, and there are certain rules that apply to that. And usually within a certain, if it's a life coach or whatever, sometimes life coaches, they don't really have set fees, and they're not really governed by anybody. And so it's kind of the Wild West where everybody can just kind of do what they want. So it gets a little bit trickier that way, but a lot of times if you're in a certain industry, there's usually an industry standard for how much you can charge. And some of that comes with confidence of knowing your worth. I started off at a certain amount, and when I started, I had people tell me, oh, that's too much, nobody's going to pay that. Nobody batted an eye. And then, 4 years later, I raised my rates again, and the same people told me, oh, that's too much, nobody will pay for that. Nobody batted an eye again, right? So I think part of it is having confidence in yourself to understand what your worth is. I think part of your worth comes from the success that you achieve with your clients. I think that's a big part of it.
Absolutely. Okay, last question. I heard about your amazing work at the University of Connecticut, UConn. Can you tell us more about all the things you do at UConn?
Sure. So I'll just give a little bit of background on the project. It's a 5-year project, and it was a $2.5 million funding grant. And the goal of the program is to recruit and retain neurodivergent students for their civil and environmental engineering programs. And so it was to be involved with this for me is amazing because I'm not an engineer, but I can provide insight into helping the students and also the faculty kind of understand. What our thought process is like and kind of what we go through and working collaboratively as part of a team. So I'm a guest lecturer at the University of Yukon for the civil and environmental engineering programs. And so I'll give lectures to faculties with students, on a variety of different topics. I also get to help consult in some of the resources that are developed, and I'm also on the advisory board. So I'm really involved in a lot of different facets, and I couldn't be more thrilled. As far as I know, this is the first kind of endeavor of its kind. So I really think that this is going to become the blueprint for a lot of other universities to follow. So it's very, very exciting.
That's incredible. Something that came to mind. So since you're up in Canada, do you have any quick analysis on comparing and contrasting how autism is seen and treated in the US versus Canada?
Well, a key indicator for me, Nathan, would be the amount of followers that I have on social media. So like, just, I haven't used MailChimp in a while, but based on my MailChimp stats, I have more followers in Florida than I do all of Canada. The different states are much more progressive than others. And again, like having worked in Maine as a therapeutic foster parent and seeing the services that were available there and then coming back to New Brunswick, Canada, I describe as not a step back in time, but a giant leap. So just right across the border, the services that are available are just unreal. The job that I had, I'll mention them because they're the training that I received from them. No other company has ever come close to matching, and it's really the foundation of what I do. And it's Spurwink Services, based out of Maine, and I got goosebumps, man. They're such an incredible company, and I met so many amazing people, and we had so much support from the people there, and they were just so practical, real, and authentic that it made the experience a tremendous one for both my wife and I.
That's incredible. Because sometimes me and my friends joke because here in the US, we often complain about the healthcare system, and one would think that the healthcare system, like say in Canada, would be on paper it looks far superior to the US, but sounds like it's maybe not the case for neurodiversity, just ironic in some ways.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of the thing. Like, yes, we do have universal healthcare, but there are limits to that. And so a big challenge that's happening right now is within our education system. So when people suspect that they may be neurodivergent, they may be autistic or have ADHD or some form of learning disability, it used to be that our education system would say, okay, it'll be a year long wait. And I don't know if it was 2 governments ago. They decided to let a bunch of the school psychologists go, and they hired a bunch of behavioral interventionists. And that went horribly. They let all the behavior interventionists go, but then they didn't hire back the school psychologists. And so then, they went from saying it would be a year to we can't tell you. And so now really people are having to pay out of pocket and to meet with private psychologists in order to get these assessments. And they're not cheap. I mean, they're between, $1,500 upwards of $4,000, depending on what you're trying to get assessed for. So, again, a lot of families who require these are likely, hovering or below the poverty line. So, they don't just have $4,000 lying around. In some cases, if it is a complex case, they may kind of jump ahead of the line as they should. It's kind of a triage type of setup. But we don't have the resources. One of the challenges for me being here, is like I've been shunned by pretty much every disability related organization because I operate from a different mindset of things can change. A lot of the folks that are here, they grew up here, they went to school here, and now they work here. They only have one point of reference to kind of draw from. And so the mentality is, well, this is how things are. It's the way that they've always been. It's the way that they're always going to be. And so they don't know another way. Right. And so kind of what I'm able to bring to the picture is, no, there is another way. I'm a thought leader in the industry. I'm just not recognized here. Right. So the irony for me is that, I went to 2 different local universities. None of them have been in touch, but yet I'm sought after by the University of Miami and UConn to be a guest lecturer. Right. So for me, and those are the types of things that are validating, right? Like I always tell people, and this is good, to circle back to the entrepreneurship piece. I always tell entrepreneurs, like, your business may be local, but your market is global. And when you really restrict yourself to thinking that business will come from, if you're only relying on local business for your survival, you're likely going to starve. So, you really do need to think. And when I had that mindset of this could be global, I taught myself, I wasn't really making money. So I taught myself how to use a bunch of the different social media platforms and was able to, people just started following me. I was just sharing a little, sayings that I'd come up with a graphic. And like, that's how I met Eileen Gruba, who's my celebrity brand ambassador. She's been on The Watchmen, Sons of Anarchy, Nip Tuck, CSI Miami, Hung, all kinds of stuff. Another person, Steve Rohr, who used to be the publicist for the Oscars, followed me, and I sent him a message, and I was like, "Hey, man, would you be interested in having a Skype call with me?" And he said yes. Right, and then he became one of my advisors, and he helped me prepare for speeches and interviews and all kinds of stuff. So, when people resonate with you, right? Like everybody loves an underdog. They love the story. So get out there and share your story. It can definitely be a part of your business, right? It's not about like. Everybody goes from A to C, but not everybody shares B. And B is the context that invites people into your world to share that part of yourself that will help you and your business, right? But again, it needs to be a good fit. It's not always, everything has to line up just right. And this is something that I enjoy having conversations with entrepreneurs about. Like I mentor different entrepreneurs, different companies. I make time out of my week to connect with different people and have Skype calls or Zoom calls, because being a social entrepreneur, it's a big part of giving back, right? Your legacy is not based on what you take. It's from what you give, right? And I think that's another big part that I think is important to mention. It's all about giving back. When you think that all you're going to do is take, then you're a big part of the problem, not the solution.
Absolutely. Get almost out of time, but here's the hardest question of all. Who are you most grateful to, and who do you want to thank for helping you to get to this point in your life?
As much as my childhood was hard, I do thank my parents, because although they didn't do things the right way, they didn't know what the right way was. They did push me to do a lot of different things. And ultimately I am who I am because of those experiences, right? I wouldn't wish them on my worst enemy, but I'm also at a point now where I wouldn't trade them for the world, right? So it inadvertently, and I'll be blunt, man. I don't know if you're a parent or not, Nathan, but I read an article a few years ago about how to fuck up your kids, and the reality is we all do it to some extent. Right? Like, I'm not going to do it to my kids the same way my parents did it to me, but it's going to be different, but we're all going to screw up our kids somehow. Like it's inevitable. It's a generational thing. I think each generation vows to do something different than the last, but even though that there is that difference, we're still going to do it in some capacity. So I think the goal is just to try to be better. That really is the goal.
Absolutely, Sean. Okay.
If I could, I should also thank my wife. I would not want this to go through without me thanking her. I mean, she has taken on, a full-time job and 2 part-time jobs to go back to the how this stuff all works, right? I couldn't have done this without her. Like, she has a full-time job where she's a director of counselors for the sexual violence New Brunswick. And she also teaches part-time at Dalhousie University and St. Thomas University in their social work faculties. So, she's had to kind of pick up the slack in other areas, like financially, so that we could make a go of this. And I'm very proud to say that, I'm at a point now where I'm starting to earn the money that I thought I would a few years ago. So things are, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. That's for sure. So I definitely want to thank her.
Yep. Thank you, Lloyd. That's very important. Okay, and we're running out of time. So to close, here is Sean's contact information, websites to follow him. To close, being neurodivergent with conditions such as autism and ADHD and Tourette's, it means we are different and not broken. These differences should be celebrated, and we are not alone. Thank you, Sean, for coming, and thank you everyone for listening today. And catch another episode of the Neurosoul podcast. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks for having me, Nathan. It's always great talking to you, man. I really enjoy our talks.
I love your insight. I think the tips will really help people who are on the fence.
Thanks. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
And have a great day, and take care,
You too.
everyone. Bye.